and I'm a lecturer in multi-level regulation at the Helsinki University of Applied Sciences, TUAS. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all here today at the event on Women in Mediation. This event is organized in a continuous celebration of International Women's Day within the framework of Comenius project on trust mediators funded by the Netherlands Initiative for Education Research. The event is also supported by the UN Youth Impact. In our Trust Mediators project, we collect experiences of lay people on factors that help them increase trust in mediators from the perspectives of their cultures. At the end of the project, we hope to create a toolkit on the desired skill set of trustworthy mediators in the intercultural context. Today, we focus on experiences of female professional mediators. Let me welcome and introduce our distinguished speakers. Ms. Aparna Mukerjee is a lawyer and internationally accredited mediator based in India. She is a regional mediator with the World Bank Group for employment disputes for India, Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. Aparna also acts as regional mediator with the Compliance Advisor Ombudsman. Aparna is a former coordinator of Tamil Nadu Mediation, which is attached to the High Court of Madras and facilitates court-referred mediation. Aparna mediated a variety of disputes, including those relating to the workplace, civil matters, community, multi-stakeholder, and others. Welcome, Aparna. It's great to have you here today. Mari Vanhanen is a judge and mediator in the District Court of Helsinki. Before joining the court, Mari was an attorney in the Nordic law firm Rocher, where she focused on complex international arbitration and litigation cases. Prior to that experience, Mari worked in the arbitration boutique Lindholm Wahlgren. Mari also spent some time in the US, where she externed at the Supreme Court of Ohio, mediated at the local court and prosecutor, and worked with the Divided Community Project, which helps communities respond constructively to civil unrest. Mari, welcome today. Thank you for accepting our invitation.
Thank you very much.
And finally, Tabitha van den Berg. Tabitha studied law at the University of Amsterdam. She trained as a legal mediator in her early 30s while pregnant with her third child, while working full-time in corporate communications at a scientific institute. In 2016, she decided to give up her full-time job and embrace the challenge of building a full-time career as a professionally accredited mediator. She established her own mediation firm, Mediation Amsterdam, and now works full-time as a mediator, trainer, and conflict resolution expert alongside two colleagues. She works as court-appointed mediator for the Court of Amsterdam and as an assessor for the International Mediation Institute. She's a member of the editorial board of Tijdschrift for Conflict Handling, and she has acted as an expert judge in many international negotiations and mediation competitions. Tabitha, it's really great to have you too. And I'm really looking forward to you all sharing your experiences with us. And in order to move to this part, let me now briefly explain the format of the event. Our student leaders from the Comenius team, Alexandra van Koppenol, Ella MacLeod, and Lorien Eudelin, will ask our distinguished speakers to share their stories of if, and if so how, gender has affected their work as mediators from the perspective of their respective cultures. Each story will be followed by a short interview by one of our students. Afterwards, we will have the Q&A session on the role of a woman in the mediation field in the intercultural context, and this part will be moderated by myself and my colleague from the project, Ms. Marika Hegeman, who is a company lawyer at TUAS. And of course, you all, dear listeners, you will be able to ask us questions through the YouTube live chat. So I think we are ready to go. So Alexandra, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Warren. My name is Alexandra Van Koppenel. I am half Palestinian and half Belgian. I'm currently a second-year law student at the Hague University of Applied Sciences. I have the honor to be interviewing Ms. Aparna Mukerjee. Ms. Mukerjee, could you please share a bit about yourself, your career, as well as a story on how gender has affected your work as a mediator?
Thank you, Alexandra. First, I'd like to thank all of you for having this event today. It's really an exciting opportunity for all of us to be here with you. And thanks also to the Trust Mediators Project for doing this. So I won't go into my background and work, since I think Barbara had already mentioned that. And I'll share an experience as you requested. So I'm based in Chennai, India, which is on the southeast coast of India. And, you know, we are a large subcontinent. So I think in India, it's not that we have a single culture. Cultural norms vary greatly across different regions and in urban and rural areas as well. With a population of almost 1.3 billion now, 28 states, 121 languages, and almost 19,500 dialects with several ethnic groups, you know, we have patriarchal and matriarchal communities in our country. We also have complexities of class, caste, religion, which intersect, you know, with gender-based complexities across. So to share one example, I do some work in the sphere of company and community disputes. So in a company and community dispute that I was once mediating, my co-mediator and I could see that the organized representatives of the community were predominantly male. They also were larger community meetings where women were also present. But we found that in those meetings, women were really not speaking. They were just present and attending, but not really talking. And we realized that for them, perhaps they were not really comfortable speaking in that larger mixed group over there. So now we had to kind of decide what to do with this information and how to proceed. You know, we wanted to be sensitive to the fact that the community traditionally had its own way of organizing itself, and also balance this with the fact that if resolution is reached, this will have an impact on all members of the community, including women. So if women had no voice in the decision-making process, they still had to live with the outcome, and would this be fair? So was our role as mediators simply to facilitate a resolution between the company and, you know, the appointed community representatives, or to go a step further and ensure that community representation included all groups in such community, including gender groups? So in this case, we kind of use some strategies to try to be gender inclusive. For instance, we had separate informal meetings with women in spaces where they felt comfortable to talk about, you know, the issues, their views, to understand their needs and interests. We checked with women if they were comfortable, if we took these views back to their community representatives, and whether they felt safe with us doing this. And when we got a yes as an answer, we took this back to the community representatives and discussed with them how these views, needs, and interests could be included in the dialogue process that we were structuring. So this is one example that I wanted to share. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. I can imagine from having visited India, it must be very complicated to have to balance all the different regions and the conflicts between them. For the first question we would like to ask you, is trust inherent within your culture in India, or is it something that you feel that it needs to be built? And does gender influence this process?
So I would say that in the context of mediation, we have different types of trust. You have trust in the process of mediation, you have trust in the mediator, and you have trust or no trust between parties in the mediation. So in India, actually, most formal mediation so far has been court-attached mediation predominantly. So trust in the mediation process and the mediator kind of flows from whether parties trust the court system. So when parties have a high trust in the court system, that trust would kind of extend to the mediator and mediation process. And if they are apprehensive or nervous about the court system, they may come in being apprehensive and nervous about the mediation process as well. So in those cases, I would say it's up to then to the mediator to build that trust through the process. By the way that, as a mediator, that, you deal with the party, that you explain the process, that you're transparent, the way you treat the parties, you kind of build that trust during the process. So I would not say that at this time, gender is really influencing in a big way the trust building process with the mediator, because very often the mediators are appointed by the court itself. So parties come in with the mediator already appointed, and some parties take some time to feel comfortable with the process and some feel comfortable more often. And I also spoke to some of my female mediator colleagues to check back with them to see if they had experiences. And I think most of us felt that, more than gender, it is seniority. Because in our culture, if you have experience and you have seniority, trust is built quicker than if you are younger and just starting to gain experience. And it may not be gender-based. We've seen more of it being seniority-based.
Right. Thank you for sharing those qualities. It's very important for our project to know what are the certain types of elements that are incorporated in the trust building process. Would you say that there are certain cultural traditions or customs relating to gender that would affect mediation?
So I think the cultural customs and traditions, do you mean in respect of the mediator, or do you mean in respect of parties?
In respect of parties.
In respect of parties. Yes, there will be some cultural and customs and traditions relating to parties that do, like gender-based, which will impact, like, for example, what I spoke about when I shared the experience, or sometimes in matrimonial cases, so sometimes in matrimonial cases in India, though the issues may be experienced by the husband and wife, in a sense, the entire family is involved. We still do have, joint families where people all live together. So it's husband and wife, along with, sometimes parents are also living in the same house. And in cases like that, though it could be a court-appointed mediation where only husband and wife come to the table, sometimes the whole family may come with them, because the decisions are made by elders in the family and not just the couple. And sometimes in those cases also, the woman or the man may not feel comfortable speaking in the presence of the other. So the mediator needs to be sensitive to that and make sure that a comfortable space is created for people to express themselves freely. They may not feel also comfortable with a mediator just of one sex sometimes. So sometimes we would look at then having one mediator of each gender so that there's a gender balance in the mediation team. So I think gender does impact, parties in mediation. I've seen it in different kinds of mediation over here.
It's interesting that you say that you have to sometimes bring in both a male and a female mediator to the party. But would you say that you, as a female mediator, would you change your approach to a mediation session based on the gender of your clients? For example, if you had two males.
So I would not change my approach based on gender. I would always do my best to make the people who are in mediation really comfortable so that they can open up and talk freely. But that is not it's not gender based. There may be times where I would put in effort to understand the culture of the people again, not gender-based, but to be culturally sensitive. So in our country, for instance, there are certain things which would be considered very disrespectful, which may not be so in other cultures. And I'm not trying to generalize over here, even within our culture, but in certain pockets, for instance, if you put your feet on the table, if you eat when you're talking to people, if you don't greet people respectfully when they come into the room and pause to do that for newcomers coming in, and show that respect. If you talk disrespectfully to people who are much older than you, there are many things which are a part of different regions in our country. So because I'm a mediator who works in different regions, if I'm working in a region that I'm new to, I will put an effort to understand what are the cultural dynamics in that region. Because when you're going in as a mediator, your intention is to make the other people as comfortable and relaxed as possible. So you don't want to be disrupting their flow with what you are doing. So, for that, I would think you need to put in that effort. And for instance, I'll just give you one example. So one of the mediations that we worked on was in the northeast region of India, which is very, very different from other regions in the country. And while we were doing the mediation, we realized that with the people that we were working with, in the way they communicated with each other, that if you say as a mediator that I'm not sure about this, I'll check and I'll let you know, in that culture, that's understood as yes. So those words are understood as yes. So if we had not learned that, during the process, if parties ask you something which you're not sure about, you'd be like, I'll check on this and I'll get back to you. So it's not a yes or a no, let me check and get back. But while we were dealing with this group of people, we realized unless it's a yes, you need to say no. If you say no and then come back with a yes, that's okay. But if you say, I'll check and get back to you, that's something which will be understood as a yes. So it could lead you to a complete, kind of miscommunication.
That's very interesting. And would you say that women in your profession are looked at differently in comparison to your male colleagues? And if so, has there been any efforts by perhaps the government or legal boards in India that try to tackle this issue?
So I would say that in India, there are more men lawyers than women. And so, as I said, that we mostly at this point have a lot of court-attached mediation programs in the country. So the flow from, the lawyers into the court-attached mediation program is natural. That being said, there are a fair number of women mediators in the court-attached mediation programs. And I, took out the statistics of the center, which is in our city with the High Court that I work with, where we have a total of 193 mediators working in our High Court, District Court, and Family Court here, out of which 119 are men and 74 are women. So the statistics of this are probably better than, women lawyers ratio to men lawyers. And as of now, I don't think that women in our profession are really being treated in some significantly different way to men that I can see. But private mediation is at a very initial stage in our country. It's still developing. And right now, as I mentioned, in court-attached mediation, the mediators, men or women, are appointed by the court to do the job. So I think that may be, we may need to wait to see how private mediation develops to perhaps understand more going forward. And I personally, in my experience, have not faced discrimination based on gender. In the work that I've done as a mediator for almost 20 years now, I've not experienced it.
Well, that's very good to hear. And thank you so much for taking the time to share your experience. It was very interesting and lovely to hear from you.
Thank you so much, Alexandra.
I would like to pass the floor to my colleague, Lauriane.
Hi, thanks a lot. Can everyone hear me correctly? Thanks a lot, Mrs. Mukerjee, for sharing your stories. That was really insightful. I'll be interviewing Mrs. van der Berg. I hope I say your name well. So as Alexandra did, could you please share a story about you and your background as a mediator, something that on how like gender could have had an impact on your work at a precise time. And then I'll carry on with the questions.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Lauriane. I was really inspired by Aparna, and at the same time I thought, oh, I'm not sure I have my numbers right. So I just went and looked up some numbers, but I'll get back to them later. So we talked a little before we had this meeting, and it made me think on what are the experiences that I have as a woman in mediation, and whether I've experienced particularly gender-based discrimination. I think I must say I have not. I've not experienced with clients, that is, the experience that they treated me different than a male mediator. I think maybe it's even been an advantage in some cases because I mediate in labor and business disputes. And I think men are more keen to open up to a woman than they might be with a male mediator, because then it's less common for men to talk emotions. And my experience underlying even the most intense, heavy and contagious business disputes, there's still a lack of trust or feeling disrespected, or there's a number of emotions underlying it. So I think as a female mediator, I'm more at liberty to ask uncomfortable questions in those kind of disputes. However, I have experienced, as Dr. Varwa said at the beginning, I was pregnant with my third child when I was practicing or trying to practice as a mediator in the beginning. And I think a lot of particularly male and particularly originally lawyer mediators discouraged me from taking the leap to become a mediator. And I don't think they did so with ill intentions. I think they honestly believed young women, especially young mothers, should not be trying their hand at mediation, because it's a tough job. It's a tough business. That is, the job itself, I think, is not as difficult, but making a business and making a living for yourself is not as easy. So I think a lot of I've had discouraging comments and unsolicited advice on not pursuing a career in ADR as a woman from older men. And I've seen that happen at international negotiation competitions also, meeting young, enthusiastic ADR professionals who are female, who are very keen to enter the sector and to start working as a mediator, or at least explore what they can do in alternative dispute resolutions, and older men who are over 50 or over 60 telling them, first get a career in law or do HR or do whatever, but don't try your hand at mediation until you have enough life and experience, and don't think you can make money, and basically don't do it. Which I'm not sure if male students would receive the same advice, but I think it's somewhat condescending, and I think it's also something that we don't need as a sector. I think we need young people, male or female, to help us foster innovation and to bring our profession further.
Yeah, that's yeah. I mean, I completely understand. And in order to start the interview, I'd like to ask like two general questions, because you have an experience abroad, but since you mainly worked in the Netherlands, do you think women are underrepresented in the Netherlands in regard to mediation, and obviously in other European countries where you've been working?
So in the Netherlands, I just looked it up. Women are underrepresented in leadership roles in the legal profession, particularly in the commercial sector. Women are quite evenly distributed in the leadership position in the mediation associations as well as in the judiciary. So in that respect, we're not underrepresented. I think there is less successful full-time business mediators who are female. And then there's less successful male mediators in the family business or the family mediation sector. So it's perhaps a bit evened out, although I don't have the exact numbers because they weren't registered on the annual report on how many male or female mediators we have in the Netherlands. But in general, I think in particularly in the commercial sector that I work in, women are underrepresented in leadership roles.
Yeah, actually, I don't find this really surprising, but I hope this will change. So any like data on like other European countries you might, like any data you might know, or any like personal experiences on this?
Well, I'm married to a man from Georgia, and I've been working in Georgia, the Caucasus, not the US, for quite some time. And it's interesting to see there are two differences. On one hand, you could say that the Georgian society is much more patriarchal than the Dutch is. Dutch girls are taught to be equal to men and are equally supported in education. Although at the same time, I think in the Netherlands, many women work part-time, and particularly becoming a mother is viewed as something that should make you temper your ambitions. And I think I know a lot of really awesome and inspiring women in Georgia that just have a career in at the technical university, or who are surgeons, much more so than I see in the Netherlands. So I think it's a difficult thing to look at just from the outside, because you may think, oh, that society is much more open to women having equal rights than the other. And I've seen there's a difference between what you see at the surface and what you see underneath it. And I think in the Netherlands, for example, last week, there was a very interesting article on what happens to female parliamentarians that speak out on any topic. And they've been subject to the most intense and most awful sexist, racist, and just in general derogatory comments, particularly on social media, in such an extent that many of them even feel that they don't want to run for parliament anymore. And it's also discouraging young women to pursue a career in political leadership. But although the Netherlands may look like an equal opportunity society, I think there's a lot of gender issues underlying it, and we need to address those.
Yeah, thanks a lot for sharing, and I completely relate with what you said on female politicians, because I'm French and this also happens a lot in France, but I don't think female decided to took that as a way to as a break to their ambitions. So I'd like to now get back to a more practical question, and more based on your experience as a mediator. So did you ever experience gender-based rejection and by the parties while you were mediating?
I think, as I said in the beginning, because I mediate in business and labor disputes, it's not really been an issue. I do know from quite a few colleagues who are in family practice that because conflicts are usually between men and women, although in the Netherlands also women and women or men and men can marry, but most of the mediations are between men and women. And there it's often, not often, but it can be a point of discussion. Do we want a female mediator or do we want a male mediator? Thinking it is an advantage if the mediator is of your own sex as the person in a dispute. So I know quite a few people that actually choose to work as a couple, so as two mediators from both genders, and that can be helpful to address any gender-based suspicions on whether the mediator is qualified or not, which I do think shouldn't be an issue. But if parties have that sense and it's a perception that it may be an issue, then it becomes an issue.
Yeah, I understand.
And just I'm thinking while I'm speaking, I think in group mediations, I do tend to work as a pair, and then I do think on what is needed here. And sometimes I've specifically chosen to work with a man because I think it may be helpful for the group dynamics and for us to be able to be good cop, bad cop, or to address certain issues. But I've also chosen to work with women who are psychologists or who are much older than me or younger than me. So it's always a matter of thinking what is useful for this case and for these people.
Okay, yeah, I mean, you partly replied to my question. I wanted to ask if you thought that gender affect how mediators mediate. So I understand that it does. Do you want to elaborate on that, or?
I think, yeah, like I said, sometimes I can get away with more questions being a woman when I'm mediating with men, because I think it's accepted of me to ask into questions that may be considered more feminine, like emotions. It shouldn't be, but it is. So I get away with more. I do think that I agree with Aparna saying that it's maybe more about a matter of seniority than it is of gender. And I think many young mediators, like I said, I've been judging at a lot of international competitions, and I've seen people who are born to mediate, who are maybe 21 or 25 and may not have had all the life experience that the senior mediators think you need to be successful as a mediator. But they'd be scared to enter the job market, feeling that their age will be used against them. And I think that's something we have to challenge, because if you can be a dentist or a heart surgeon at 28, after going to school for 10 years and doing your absolute best to be the most skilled professional that you can be, if you can be trusted with life, then you should be able to be trusted with conflicts as well. If you have the affinity and the strong drive and the willingness to learn the skills. And I think some of the young professionals that I've seen may be even better than some of the older professionals, because they haven't had to unlearn as many of the things that I think become part of who you are as a professional. If you've been an architect or a lawyer, then you've been used to be asked for advice and to take leadership in any dispute and tell people where they're supposed to go. And I think as a mediator, you're most effective if you're able to empower the client to find their own ways and to decide together or separately where they want to go. So I think young mediators don't have to unlearn as much as some of the older professionals that find their calling for mediation in their 40s or 50s or even older.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I'd like to finish with, since we have a few students watching us, probably female students, do you have any advice for them? They might choose this path and they might want to work as a mediator. Do you have any advice and any tips for them?
That I could talk for a day on that topic. I do think it's important for women to support each other, and also for women to break through their fears or assumptions about being an entrepreneur. I'm not gonna lie, it's not an easy profession to make a decent living in. At least it isn't in the Netherlands, particularly not as a labor or business mediator. I think family mediators are a bit more of a custom nowadays. But if this is what you want, then go for it. But do realize that if you open a bakery, you can't depend on people just accidentally passing by your bakery and smelling the bread and buying it to have sufficient income at the end of the day. And it's no different being a mediator. And I think a lot of women are not raised to be entrepreneurs or to think of themselves as a product or service and to market themselves as such. But I think you can be you can be an entrepreneur with integrity and make a living as a mediator and as a female mediator, but you have to be willing to break through those some of your own barriers and some of the barriers that maybe society imposes on you. So if this is your calling, go for it.
Okay, thanks a lot for sharing once again. Ella, the floor is yours now.
Thank you so much, Lorian, and thank you so much to you, Tabitha van der Berg. My name is Ella MacLeod. I am 21 and I am a Norwegian student in the International and European Law Program. I work also as co-president for UN Youth Impact based here in The Hague, and I am one of the student assistants for the Trust Mediation project. And I will be interviewing Ms. Mari Vanhanen. And my first question that I want to ask you is, to what extent does gender influence the way parties build trust with the mediator? And I was wondering if you could also talk a bit about your role as a judge and a mediator in this scenario.
Yes, thank you very much. To start with, of course, every interaction with the parties is an opportunity to build trust and rapport. And starting from the very first contact, you have a chance to build that with the parties. But because I am a judge and a court-connecting mediator, I go to those interactions not just as a woman, but in that role. And I think, to follow up what Aparna was saying in her comments, I think that can have a very important impact in how parties build trust. And to speak from the Finnish perspective, Finland has traditionally been a country where people have a strong trust in institutions. A huge majority, based on research, has trust in the justice system. The profession of a judge is highly respected. So when you go to a mediation, you have a fair chance that the parties, as a starting point, have trust in the courts and perhaps in the process that will take place in the courts. Of course, then the question about gender becomes, and I also had discussions with my very experienced colleagues in the courts. I'm happy to say we are more than 20 female mediators in the District Court of Helsinki. And I think the feedback was that gender very rarely plays a role, or at least how they see it. But perhaps, and this is an area that I personally don't do, I don't do family mediations, for example, custody disputes. But there, I understand that trust building might be especially sensitive issue if you have a situation where there are two parents who are a man and a woman, and then the mediation, there are two mediators who are women. With us, the family cases are usually mediated by one judge and a professional who might be from a social worker or a psychologist. So if you have that set up and perhaps the attorneys are also female, then the lone man might feel a bit alone. So I think that's something you have to tackle. But that's a specific scenario where you might encounter specific challenges in that respect. But in general, gender is not in such a big role, perhaps.
Thank you so much. I think it was really interesting to hear about the trust in the justice system and how it affects mediation, because I think it's quite similar in both of our cultures. And I'm really happy to hear that you also have more than 20 female mediators on your staff. That's really great. I was wondering, do you ever feel like you have to overcompensate to gain trust among parties as a result of your gender?
I was thinking about this question from the perspective of my work as a mediator in the court, but also my plus 10 years in the practice of business law, where you see more and more female attorneys, general counsel who are women. And even there, I think also being fortunate to have a lot of strong role models, strong female role models throughout my career. I don't think I've ever felt the need to really overcompensate as a result of my gender. And I might say, I think to me, overcompensate as a word also sounds a bit like bringing focus on myself as the mediator instead of the parties. And I think I really want to avoid that, because it's really the parties who are at the center stage. And I really strongly believe that when you listen to the parties, you respect and recognize the inherent dignity of everyone in the process, then the parties will come to respect you and understand that you are there to help them.
Thank you so much for sharing. So moving on to my third question, I was wondering, to what extent do you feel that your culture influences the way that you mediate?
I think, to me, coming from Finland, the traditional stereotypical thinking perhaps has been that the Finnish culture is quite reserved, perhaps more than others. We do give space to each other and also expect space to be given to us many times. To give an example, my grandfather started to talk at the very late. And when he did, he spoke very well, but he said he simply had nothing to say before that moment. And I think that definitely affects or might affect the way we are in a mediation. And I wanted to tell you a story. This is from a colleague, but I think it captures very well the topic. This was in a mediation training where there were two mediators, one from Finland and one from Spain. And they were asked to actively listen to each other and then give feedback on that exercise. Now, the mediator from Finland first listened to her colleague from Spain like, yes, nodding, perhaps asking a question here and there. Then it was her turn to tell her story, and her colleague from Spain was very engaged, asked a lot of questions, and showed interest in that way. When it came time to give feedback, the mediator from Spain said, I felt you weren't really interested in what I had to say. I felt like you weren't listening, really. The mediator from Finland, in turn, felt I was being interrupted all the time. I didn't really get to say what I wanted to say, perhaps. And I think there are really different ways of approaching this. Myself, I do recognize the more quiet type when I am mediating and listening to the parties.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. I think that a lot of us also can relate to such issues, especially as being international students here in The Hague and trying to form friendships with people from all over the globe. So moving on to my fourth question, which connects a bit into our cultures and how they overlap. So having looked at how trust building is conducted in Norway, I found that trust is an inherent feature among strangers, and that personal relationships when building trust can be an asset but are not considered necessary. And I think that this ties into some of the elements that you were talking about, that there's a high trust in the justice and legal system in our country. And I was wondering if this element is also present in Finnish culture, and if you could elaborate a bit more on this topic.
Yes, I do think it is like you described, that personal relationships are definitely an asset, or can be, but they are not necessary. If you think of the society, we are a very small country, and of course, you do often, although you don't know someone, you usually, or many times, you know someone who knows someone. And this is especially true when you look at for example, the courts, the attorneys, the people who are working in that sphere. So I do think that's present, and that also makes it a bit easier if I think you will over time encounter the same attorneys, for example, in the courts. They know who you are, they've seen you before, they have discussed with you before. I come from the legal profession, I've been an attorney. I know many people who I've encountered over the years. It's easier perhaps to then build trust when you have that basis. So I do think that, and many times, of course, you can always pick up the phone and call someone and ask.
Thank you so much for sharing. I think it's a really interesting discussion, and I think that from having listened to all of you speak, it seems that you haven't encountered that much struggles of gender inequality in the field, but that there might be some barriers, especially when entering into the field, and especially maybe also in other sectors, such as in family mediation. And I wanted to go back to the topic we were talking about, that in some fields in mediation that you can encounter difficulties based on your gender, both as a mediator and as a party. And I was wondering, as a mediator, what can you do to address these concerns?
Could you please elaborate on the question?
Yeah, I will. So basically, if you as a mediator in a field of mediation and realize that you're having difficulties based on your gender in a mediation, for example, in a mediation dispute with a family, where you as a woman feel that you're being rejected as the mediator, or that you're struggling to build trust, what can you do to address these concerns that the parties are having?
I think that's a very good question that kind of ties into the process, that every step of the way you of course try to do your best to build trust, and at some point you might realize that, okay, there is an issue here, and of course then you have to be very conscious and think what that might be caused by, what might be the root cause. Of course, you might try to have a discussion and try to very cautiously see what that's all about. I still think if you can address many issues as long as you can keep the parties in the room and discussing and kind of getting over that barrier. But there might be, of course, circumstances where they cannot be bridged. And I would be happy to hear my colleagues' thoughts on that as well. Perhaps they have encountered those situations.
Yeah, thank you so much for addressing this. I think that's some really valuable advice, addressing the root causes and sort of continuing the discussion. And I would now like to hand the floor over to Marike, who will be handling the questions and answer session. Thank you so much, Mari Vanhanen.
Thank you, Ella, for giving me the opportunity. And I first would like to thank for all the inspiring stories just heard. Really, really insightful it is. And we actually do have some questions of our listeners over here, and I try to read them. I got here a question from Stephen, and he asked, if you are rejected for reasons of gender, where can you address this and how? Would any one of our dear guests answer this question?
I can take the question if you want. I think you can't.
You can't?
I think, well, I'm not employed. I think if I was employed, then perhaps I could ask my employer to step in. But I'm self-employed. So if someone is, I would assume, because I don't think people would openly reject me on my gender, but if somehow someone for whatever reason wouldn't feel comfortable with me, and I would, even if I would suspect it was my gender, then there's very little I can do, because if parties don't trust me and don't feel comfortable with me, then I will not be the instrument of their fruitful dialogue.
No,
So on an individual base, there's very little I can do.
the only thing you can do is reject the case and give it back. So you
And if I can just add to what Tabitha said. So I think as mediators, you know, as Marie mentioned also, we have to always remember that we are there to help the parties. It's not about us as mediators. So I think gender-based rejection could be something which may crop up for anybody at some time. I think the most you can do with any rejection where parties feel uncomfortable is attempt to have a conversation with them to try to understand why they're uncomfortable, to address that if you can. But if for any reason they're not comfortable to speak or they don't want to go into it, you have to just respect that. Because it's not about you asserting your rights in the process. It's about them being comfortable and finding a mediator that works for them. So
yes,
I
it's
think we have to
interesting.
remember that.
Yeah, you could try to find out what the reason might be, actually. Yes, lovely. Thank you very much to both of you. I got another question from Roxanne, and she asked, what's making a good mediator and what is the role of gender in there? How can you use your gender in your advantage in mediation? If you can do so. Who wishes to answer this question?
If I may just jump in, because to add to this question, because Mari said a great thing about a few skills of a mediator that helps reach parties settlement, but if maybe Tabitha and Aparna could also elaborate, if you could formulate one absolutely necessary factor or skill of a mediator that makes a mediator trustworthy vis-a-vis parties, what would that be? You mentioned court authority. You both work, two of you, sorry, work in the framework of court annex mediation. But I'm very curious to hear what would be the skill that makes a good mediator, as Roxanne is asking, but also when it comes to trust building.
So shall I go first, Tabitha? Is that okay? So actually, after working in the field for some time now, I actually believe that mediation training and learning the skills can only take you so far. Like, I've met so many mediators, and I feel that it needs to be your personality along with the skills. So for me, I think the one quality which I've seen in many of the really good mediators that I've met is that when they're with parties, you can feel their true intention is just to help everybody in the room. There is no other agenda. There is nothing. You can feel that intention. And I think that's something that you can't be trained to do. Some people have that, and you can feel that that intention is without any judgment whatsoever. So I think that is one quality which may be an intangible, but it's something that I've come across in many of the mediators that I really admire and look up to.
Thank you very much.
And I very much agree with Aparna on the true intentions of a mediator needs to be none other than to support those who are in the room trying to figure out their way out of a difficult situation, because usually they come to us because they haven't managed to solve it themselves first, and often tried for months and sometimes years. I think another very important aspect of a successful mediator is his or her willingness to really self-evaluate continuously. So even when we're talking about bias, whether it be gender bias or different bias, you need to be super critical on your own gut feeling, whether it belongs to the parties or whether it belongs to you. Because obviously you're a person who has grown but also who's had experiences in life, and it's easy, especially in the beginning, to confuse that was what is going on in the room and that what is going on inside of you. So I think a good mediator needs to be highly sensitive on understanding the specifics of their own instrument, which is your body, your biases, your thought process, how you respond to conflict, what you do when you feel pressured or challenged by parties or by something they say. Is it yours or is it theirs? And you need to be excellent at distinguishing those things. And it doesn't mean you have to deny that you have those human urges, but you have to find a way to make sure it doesn't interact with the conflict dynamics of the people in the room. So I think that's, for me, the key element of being a good mediator.
If I may add on that, because Roxana asked about how gender could help. I think Mrs. van der Berg, you said that regarding questions about emotions, you were usually, probably slightly better, like not better, if it's not the right word, but you had an advantage compared to other like male mediators. So I think that's really interesting. And did you ever feel like that, Mrs. Mukerjee or Vanhanen?
So if I understand what you're saying, it's that it's an advantage, gender is an advantage in terms of how the parties may perceive you. So I think, when I'm dealing with parties in a mediation, for me, like, they're just human beings and I'm a human being, so I may not have looked at it through this particular lens. So it's hard for me to say. So I may look at, certain aspects of my personality perhaps being an advantage for me or disadvantage, but I can't say I've particularly noticed anything gender related in that way.
Maybe I'm allowed to add something to this, because in literature it's often suggested that women mediators will bring different soft skills to mediation and that they will be the catalysts to women's empowerment. And on the other hand, you can read that mediators are supposed to be neutral and they should take care of a gender-blind approach in practice. Mrs. Vanhanen, may I ask you, how do you see this? Do you think a female mediator should empower women, or do you think it's more important that gender does not matter at all?
I think, of course, neutrality is a very important value in general, because if the parties perceive that you are not neutral, it's very easy to lose confidence in the process. Now, when it comes to being completely blind as to gender or other elements, I don't think that's possible. And I think we need to be very conscious. Of course, there are many issues that we bring with us to the mediation. Gender is one thing, and there might be a context where that does affect, and you have to recognize that and self-reflect how that might affect that situation. So in that sense, I think we need to be very conscious. I don't think we can be fully blind as to those qualities, but we need to just identify that, recognize that it might have an effect on mediation, and then consider what that means for the process.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Just a bit. I do think there might be a gender effect, and with the risk of generalizing, I think if I look at my practice, often women have no problem showing their sadness or their grieving, but find it more hard to express their anger. And on the other side, a lot of men are maybe culturally programmed so to be more tough in their wording and to have less difficulty expressing their anger, but a lot of difficulties expressing their underlying emotions or where they are vulnerable. And I think as a mediator, whether I'm female or not, it's my job to empower both to be able to express a more complete set of emotions. Because if we don't work through the emotions, then there's not going to be a settlement.
Oh, it's lovely. So you should empower both, not just the women. Yeah, lovely. Thank you. Let me see whether there are any other questions.
Yeah,
Well,
we
there
also. Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, yes, go ahead.
No,
please.
I just wanted to also ask regarding the soft skills and the strong woman, because it's very interesting that we're speaking about mediation as a soft way of resolving disputes, but in other alternative dispute resolution techniques like arbitration, and Mari probably will also be able to tell us a little bit more about it, we actually have a professional field dominated by males still. And mediation, of course, from your experiences, looks like a field which is more, well, the gender bias is not so apparent, but I'm very curious to hear a little bit more in the context of our last question that we have in the live chat about the leadership skills of mediators and female mediators. And I would like to start with you, Tabitha. You already elaborated a little bit in this regard, but if you could also tell us what made you decide to become a self-employed mediator, and yeah, what made you take that decision? And then if the two of other speakers could also elaborate on what is the most important leadership skill, or how can we actually empower women or help them develop, young female mediators, help them develop their leadership skills. So if we could treat it as the last question, because unfortunately we are running out of time, it would be great to hear your answers. So let's start with you, Tabitha. Thanks.
Okay, if I'm extremely honest, probably if I could have been an employed mediator, I would have preferred that. I was like I said, my husband is a migrant and it's harder to find work in the Netherlands. He doesn't work nowadays, but I was a main incomer. And I think I would have preferred not to take the deep dive into being an entrepreneur, but I felt an urge to be a mediator, and there was no other way than to be self-employed. And I do believe I've been successful because of my financially challenging situation, because it made me break through a lot of assumptions. It made me push myself harder. It made me challenge myself to go out there, even though I wasn't programmed from everyone in my family is employed and not an entrepreneur. So it was hard, but because I needed to, and because I felt a real urge to be that mediator, I feel like I was born to do this. I made it happen. And I think a lot of women or men who are too comfortable in their life and have an easy way of earning a living, maybe not doing what they feel they're called to, but it is paying the bills, particularly lawyers who may want to become full-time mediators, but are living a comfortable or are earning a comfortable income being lawyers. They're not going to make it as full-time mediators. So yeah, I jumped because I had to, and because I had to, I think I became successful.
Thank you very much. And can we get just a very short piece of advice regarding leadership skills for female mediators and all younger mediators from the two other speakers? Aparna, can we start with you?
Yeah, so I think to pick up on what Tabitha said, I think for me, it's a value that I believe in every human being's right to kind of self-determination, and to have, the right to decide in their lives how they would like their lives to go, since we only have one life each. And I think that's what drew me to mediation, and possibly like the style of mediation being far more facilitative than evaluative. That being said, I think there are times where you absolutely need to be firm with process, because otherwise, you could just be looping, in the mediation, while not getting into the sphere of taking decisions for other people, but you have to be sometimes firm with timelines and with process related things. So I think as far as young mediators go, I think all of us who are there already in the field, whether it's, having youngsters intern with us, seeing where we can give them opportunities to co-mediate with us, where we can give them credit and recognition, for the work that they're doing, where we can encourage that they're accepted by people who trust us. And so then if we trust somebody who's young and doing a great job, that we get that trust extended to them also. And I don't mean to discriminate between young women or young men. I think that they all deserve a chance if they're, really interested and passionate and good at the work they do, that we should all do whatever we can. So that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mari.
Thank you so much. I really wanted to get into mediation because I strongly believe that there's a better way to resolve disputes. And as to the advice, seek out great role models. I can't stress that enough. I've been very fortunate to get encouragement from senior mediators. And to follow up on a point that Tabitha mentioned early on, I've also received encouragement from senior male mediators, which I think has been very important. And I think it's very important for mediators to extend that support to the young, enthusiastic mediators that they meet. Co-mediation is an excellent way to learn, to show your skills, to develop as a mediator. And I would also strongly recommend to seek out opportunities to do that.
Thank you very much. So unfortunately, we have to wrap up. We are already 7 minutes beyond our schedule. So thank you so much to all speakers. It was really a great pleasure to hear to your stories, and congratulations on all your achievements and fantastic work, and keep up with the great work. I would also like to thank our interviewers and Marika. And I would also like to apologize for some sound issues at the beginning. I hope it all was understandable to you, and we will also post the bios and in the comment section of our speakers, and some information about our project Trust Mediators, so that those who are interested can also follow up. And you will definitely hear more from us. But again, thank you very much for this event today. It's been a pleasure, and I wish everyone a great evening. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you so